So from the previous class, when we were discussing plant growth, you already know that there are 5 growth hormones that help in the development and growth of plant. But in addition to this, we will be discussing certain phenomena associated with growth. So the first thing that we will be discussing today is phytochrome. Phytochrome is a pigment discovered by Broadwick and Hendricks. So phytochrome, what it does is it exists in 2 forms. Inactive phytochrome and active phytochrome. Both these pigments are interchangeable. But this basically happens in the presence of different wavelengths of light. So basically when we talk about inactive phytochrome, it exists in red light. The form of phytochrome that you're going to find in the presence of red light is inactive phytochrome. But in the far red light, you're going to find the phytochrome in its active form. So basically both forms are interchangeable depending on the wavelengths of light, and phytochrome is involved in the development of plants. In addition to this, how phytochrome eventually helps in plants is, first you have to understand a certain phenomenon called photoperiodism. By photoperiodism, by this what it means is the amount of light that a plant receives during a day. So within a 24-hour period, how much a plant receives a light. This is what it means by photoperiodism. This photoperiodism was again discovered by Garner and Allard, who observed that in a certain variety of tobacco, if the light period and dark period was interrupted, the plants would not produce flowers. So let's just take this example of a tobacco plant. Tobacco plant is a short day plant. By short day plant, what it means is it requires less amount of light, but rather it requires a huge night period. So in this case, the slanting lines are represented as light period, and this huge blank space is represented as dark period. So generally for a tobacco plant to flower, it will require a longer dark period, that means a long night and a short day period. So in this case, the plant is producing flowers. Now what happens is, the dark period is being interrupted by light. Now in this particular case, the tobacco plant does not produce flowers because the dark period was interrupted by light. But if the light period is interrupted by dark period, the plant still produces flowers. So this phenomenon of production of flowers due to the exposure of light is called photoperiodism, and it was observed or discovered by Garner and Allard by observing in a tobacco plant. what it means is tobacco plant is a short day plant. By short day plant, what it means is it requires a less amount of light period and a huge amount of dark period. So generally, this is the normal condition. The plant is producing flowers. But the moment the dark period is interrupted by light, it will not produce any flowers. And even if the light period is interrupted by dark period, the plant still requires or is able to produce flowers because its main requirement is a huge dark period. So this is what it means by photoperiodism. So depending on photoperiodism, you can classify plants into either short day plants, that means plants who require a longer night, or long day plants. By this what it means is plants who require a shorter night and day neutral plants. By this what it means is plants will still be able to produce flowers irrespective of the length of the night. Example is tobacco for short day plants. For long day plants, example is spinach, and for day neutral plants there is tomato. So how your photoperiodism is able to produce flowers is due to phytochrome, and phytochrome is generally active in the far red light. That means the conversion of phytochrome, active phytochrome, to inactive phytochrome basically occurs during dark period. But during the daytime, the inactive form becomes active. So depending on the amount of light it receives, phytochrome helps in photoperiodism, and photoperiodism in turn helps in the production of flowers. Now moving on to seed germination, you already know that germination is the metabolic changes in which seed undergoes certain changes to produce a small seedling. You know, earlier in your smaller classes, you already know that the requirements for germination are water, temperature and oxygen. If all these conditions are met, then a plant is able to germinate. So depending on this, again we also know that there are different types of germination like hypogeal and epigeal germination. Hypogeal germination, what happens is the cotyledons remain below the ground. In epigeal germination, the cotyledons are brought above the ground. Again, there is a special type of germination called vivipary. In vivipary, what happens is the seeds germinate in which the fruit is still attached to the parent plant. So now, moving on from germination, you have all heard about seed dormancy and quiescence. In order for a seed to germinate, it has to overcome these two conditions, seed dormancy and quiescence. Quiescence is generally a condition in which the seed is not able to germinate due to unfavorable environmental conditions. That means if the seed does not receive proper air, water or temperature, the seed will not germinate. So such a thing is due to unfavorable conditions and it's called quiescence. But seed dormancy, what it does is, despite the environmental conditions being favorable, the seed is still not able to germinate, and such a state is called seed dormancy. Generally, seed dormancy happens due to hard seed coat. If a seed coat is hard, then water will not enter the seed and the seed coat will not burst open, so therefore the embryo cannot come out of the seed. Another thing is immature embryo. In order for a seed to germinate, that is to produce a radicle or plumule, the embryo has to be a mature one. But in certain seeds, the embryo is immature. In certain plants like orchids, even if the embryo is mature, it will still require a certain period called after ripening. And in certain plants, after ripening period is not available, so the seed remains in a condition of dormancy. And then again there are growth inhibitors like abscisic acid, which promote seed dormancy. So generally seed dormancy are due to these conditions which provide the plant to adapt to the changing environmental conditions. So these reasons for seed dormancy can be overcome by doing a few things. Like the first thing you can do is scarification. By scarification, what you are doing is you are rupturing the seed coat by either a machine or with knives. So basically when you are doing it, the seed coat becomes soft and it can easily rupture by entry of water. Another one is stratification. By stratification, what it means is you are subjecting the seed to alternating high or low temperatures, so the seed becomes active and is able to germinate. And another way of overcoming seed dormancy is by application of growth factors like gibberellins. Gibberellins promotes germination, whereas abscisic acid inhibits. So all these conditions can be used to overcome seed dormancy. So despite the plants having the ability to grow, there will still come a certain age in which the plants are no longer able to grow. That means the plants have reached the age of maturity. This particular thing, when a plant reaches a maturity, is called senescence. And it is probably the period leading to the death of the plant. So when we talk about senescence, there are different types. Whole senescence. By whole senescence, what it means is the entire plant starts to stop growing. Then there is a form in which the older leaves, they stop growing. So senescence is a stage in which the plants stop growing further. That means they have already attained a stage of maturity. Then you have already heard about shedding of the leaves in the autumn, and again they are able to grow in spring. So basically this condition of falling of the leaf or shedding of the leaves is called abscission. Abscission basically occurs in mature plants, that is basically in organs like fruits, leaves and stems. If abscission occurs in the vegetative parts of a plant, it might help in the growth or propagation of plants. So this is the end of the plant growth.